During a high school class project, my teacher told me it's unrealistic being a CEO. It's been my dream to be a CEO since I was 10. So I told her, it is realistic. Follow me on my journey to learn what it takes to become a CEO. Welcome to another episode of the Realistic CEO podcast. Today is actually my first episode on Zoom or online, so it's pretty cool to have my first episode being online. After about 50 plus episodes in person, first one online with Kerim, so I appreciate that. Thank you for coming on today and allowing me to interview you, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on a great book. Really appreciate it, and it's got a very important message to it.
Thank you so much. My first question that I want to ask you is, can you tell us a little bit about what you do here at Atlas Network?
Sure. I'm the CEO of the company, so that means that I basically started this company. I'm the founder and president, acting president. And our company is a very interesting company. What we look to do is basically connect the dots in the realm of the supply chain industry. This is a global economy that we live in today. And to be able to have a service that connects the dots between the continents and works within a construct to really be able to get goods in the hands of consumers and business people that promotes and perpetuates the global economy is a very important task. We've been doing this for more than 20 years. We have offices in the United States and overseas. And again, our hope is to basically avoid expensive mistakes for entrepreneurs, small, medium, and large size businesses by giving them best practices and giving them the resources where they don't have that in the area of cross-border trade and global supply chain.
Can you tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got to where you are today within your company, but also how you started it as well?
Yeah, sure. Going back to your book, right? I think that wanting to be a CEO or wanting to be an entrepreneur starts pretty early for a lot of us. For others, you come to it in a different path, but it's never really totally a straight path. I remember when I was a kid, 6 years old, selling blueberries on the side of the road. We had a big bush, it produced a lot of blueberries. There was a need, there was an interest. People were doing lemonade, I was doing blueberries. And that was just a thing that we did at the time, and it graduated from there into other entrepreneurial activities, whether it was selling t-shirts in the mall and then starting my first .com and then working in and out of the corporate world, but always having an entrepreneurial mentality. I started the company, the Atlas Network, back in 2005, but it was the culmination of many different experiences, including who I am as a person, that really brought it together as a business. And what those were, some of those consulting experiences I had, financial experiences I had, regulatory experiences that looked around things like risk mitigation and controls and objectives, and then really having an international sort of mindset. I grew up in an immigrant household. We spoke three languages from the very beginning, French, Arabic, and English. And our family was spread out throughout the world. So I was on my first airplane at probably 3 or 4 months old. When you're an entrepreneur and you have all these different experiences and you have this international mindset, it all came together for me to produce this company called the Atlas Network after I went to Asia. I was traveling there and I saw the beauty of global manufacturing and supply chain and what it was. But those experiences previously, plus that entrepreneurial mindset and that international kind of concept in my brain resonated. And I said, hey, you know what? There's a real problem here. People want to facilitate mass production, they want to take advantage of the global economy. But there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of problems, a lack of visibility, a lack of transparency, a lot of misnomers around the level of quality that you can produce domestically versus overseas. And therefore, there's a problem. And what do entrepreneurs look to do and CEOs of companies look to do? They look to solve that, solve problems. And that was the beginnings of the Atlas Network. Here's an issue with an industry. How can we basically provide a really great service for those that don't have the capabilities or wherewithal or resources to facilitate that kind of work? And that was essentially the beginnings of the Atlas Network.
For me, I understand, but what exactly is it that you're doing with the supply chains and to make sure that the people are getting what they deserve, like you said?
First of all, you're not alone. The supply chain industry, up until pretty much the pandemic, was something that's always been a very important part of our business and our economy, but wasn't really in the spotlight as much. Really, it was during the pandemic where people couldn't get things that they needed. It wasn't on the shelves, or the costs of certain common products were skyrocketing by 10, 20, 30, 200 times what they should be. And the word supply chain started getting out in the common vernacular, and people wanted to understand and know more about this. And so, really, what it is that we do more than anything else is to streamline the end to end process of the supply chain. So, what does that mean if we were to break it down? For different clients, it may mean different things, but I'm going to tell you the holistic view on it. And I also wrote a book which is called Supply Chain Ups and Downs, which explains a lot of this too. And I talk a lot about it on podcasts and on TV, and do a lot of networking and those kinds of ways in social media. But the point is that if we were to look at the supply chain from the very beginning, from the idea on a napkin, okay, you've got this concept and you essentially want to produce this product or whatever it may be. And so you need to basically have the suppliers to do that. So we assist companies and entrepreneurs in the very beginning stages with picking the right suppliers. And there's a whole mechanism around that. You look at quantitative factors, you look at qualitative factors, you try to understand why they're the best suppliers. Now, because the supply chain industry is very disruptive and things can change, you don't just look for one supplier, you look for supplier one, two, three, four, five, and maybe you prototype and make samples with all of them, so that if something happens to one of those suppliers, you have backup plans. So the supplier selection process and the prototyping and development process is the first step. Then after that, you then go into the production process. And the production process needs oversight. It needs babysitting. It needs people to make sure that these suppliers are actually meeting the time frames, they're meeting the quality, they're meeting the standards, the industry standards and the client standards. And so you have to have supply chain management around that process when you're actually on the production line and widgets are coming out, that it's meeting everybody's needs. After that stage, you then need to get these widgets or these products from point A to point B. So you need logistics. You need to basically package it all up. You need to get it on pallets. You need to put it in containers and load it and get it to a port where basically it's going to then do some kind of a transit, some kind of a shipment. And in most cases, this may be an overseas shipment. It could go by plane, train, boat, many different mechanisms. But the point is, it's got to get from point A to point B. And then when we transit these goods or these products, the next stage is the customs clearance process. So as you come through international ports, especially if it's an international or even sometimes state to state within a country or a nation, there are duties and taxes, right? People want to basically charge you to bring things across your border. We assist clients with that process too, that as these goods come through, that they are officially customs cleared and then picked up at the port. And they're picked up at the port and then have to then be transited or trucked usually, or sometimes train or so on, which is called the last mile, to the final delivery site. The delivery site could be a warehouse, it could be a client's facility, where it could be some kind of a fulfillment center. But the point is, those goods have to get trucked to that place. They get offloaded, they get put into inventory, and then the business operates with those products, either distributing them or directly selling them or B2B or B2C or whatever you're doing. And that's that process. And then after you basically facilitate that end process of sort of the sales cycle of these products, then you have the reordering process and the procurement process where everything then happens all over again. You go back to that supplier, they start producing it, you start watching it, quality control, logistics, shipping, customs clearance, delivery, warehousing, fulfillment, reordering, back again. And so in the book, in my book, I created something which is called the PPI pyramid, which visually explains essentially what the supply chain is in many ways, where it's really focused in on the procurement process, the production process, and then the inventory process with all of the micro steps that happen and take you through. And that's what we do for hundreds of clients, millions of products every single day for the past almost 2 decades or more than 2 decades. And this is an invaluable service because there are many entrepreneurs who don't have the resources to do that. They don't have the capabilities, they don't have the bandwidth, the time, whatever it may be. They need to outsource, they need to delegate this very important role to others or to an organization like mine to help them to do this. Because if they don't, then again, they eat up their precious commodity, which is their time. They maybe have major disruptions in their business as far as getting the products, or when they get them, they have issues and they don't know how to solve these issues. They don't have people to protect their interests. And what happens then? The business could go out of business. People lose their jobs and things go off the train goes off the tracks very quickly. The only kind of consistent factor in the supply chain, if I was to tell you, is inconsistency. Every day you are battling different kinds of disruptions that are in your control and the things that aren't in your control. Things that aren't in your control are going to be like a war or political environment or force majeure or environmental conditions or whatever you may think of that can impact the entire supply chain operating properly from end to end. But all you can do is be sure that you have backup plans and you have a resilient, robust mechanism to be able to facilitate work even when you have these kinds of disruptions. And so that's what we do for many companies as well.
What are like the biggest challenges that you notice within these companies when it comes to their supply chains?
It depends, really, depending upon the type of company. So, a perfect example would be an entrepreneur who has no experience in an industry. They just say, hey, I saw this thing. I think it's a really cool idea. Maybe if I take one plus two plus three and I put it together, this great idea could be a great product. There's a lot of analysis that needs to be done to understand whether a product is really something that's going to be feasible for the industry and so on. Or maybe an entrepreneur has an idea of how they want to make that product, what materials to use, and so on. But after you go through the process, you start to understand, hey, this shouldn't be made out of this material. It should be made out of this material. Or we should change the design a little bit because if we don't, it's going to be unsafe or it'll be too fragile or it could break. And those challenges are usually for beginning businesses or beginning entrepreneurs and getting them over a hurdle to understand that maybe what's originally in their mind may still not be a feasible product. So that's what I would say for beginning businesses. For mid to large size businesses, they tend to focus more on cost and efficiency. And so when it comes to the efficiency, we look to facilitate that, to help them to streamline their processes. And sometimes that means having them totally leave their current supply chain. They may come in and say, hey, we've had the supply chain for this long. We like it. If it ain't broke, why change it? But in the end of the day, we spotlight for them and say, it may not have been broken, but you're losing in these other 5 ways. So let's talk about it. And the challenge is making someone change their mentality after a long time doing something potentially not the best way or in the most efficient manner. That's one. The other one is around costs. One challenge that many businesses may face is that they got some kind of an unrealistic cost and are having bad results because of that. And what their product really should cost to be done properly and well managed and with a respectable supplier is something that may be 10, 20, 30, or even 100 times more than what they're currently paying. That's a tough pill to swallow. But when you discuss it or you frame it in terms of, yeah, you may be getting this for $1, but you're dealing with 30 or 40% defects. Really, what it should be is it should be a $2 product or a $1.50 product, and your levels of defects will be like 1%. This is a divide that you have to connect the dots for certain businesses that are very cost focused. Again, depending upon the size of a business, what industry they operate, how many years, the challenges really vary. And we have to be adaptable as supply chain experts to be able to talk to those audiences based upon what they need and what they care about the most.
So you talked about how like the taxes are depending on whether it's you're even going across state lines or especially international or national lines. What is that process and how does that work with the taxes when it comes to shipping products?
If we're talking internationally, we're talking about things like tariffs and duties. And basically, President-elect Trump has been talking a lot about implementing much more significant tariffs and duties between, let's say, the United States and China, the United States and Canada, and the United States and Mexico. And oftentimes these are done for economic reasons, But there are many times also that these kinds of sanctions, if you want to say, that go beyond reasonable tariffs and duties are put into place to curb behavior or for political reasons. And sometimes it could basically be a matter of saber rattling, which basically everybody's just trying to flex their muscles so that they get the other group to do what they want them to do because there's large scale billions of dollars of economics that are at play. And sometimes it's realistic. But no matter what, it's important to understand this because those additional tariffs, those additional duties usually get passed on to the American consumer, where a business says, okay, we're taking in these costs. We can't feasibly make the profit margins that we would like to make or need to make. So we need to push this down to the customer. And so in the end, we have consumers that end up having to pay these duties in terms of having an increased price on their product. If it's a luxury good, maybe the business will absorb it a little bit, but generally it's passed off. And what ends up happening there in terms of just global economics is it reduces the amount of buying, which then, because of the inflation, which can then potentially create recession, and in worst case scenarios, could even create a scenario of depression in a potential marketplace where people aren't buying and selling and businesses go out of business and jobs are lost and so on. The business of tariffs and duties is an important and understandable one, but as long as it's done within particular metrics, and the metrics that we have in the United States to measure when things have gone too far, there's two reports that are important that people look at, which are the PPI report and the CPI report. The PPI report basically is the producer price index report, and the CPI report is the consumer price index report. And as these increase, it shows us that the cost of goods are going up, and basically consumers are not buying enough, or they're stopping their buying levels. And so it's very important that we look at these economic indicators when it comes down to it. But long story short of it is that as goods come through ports, there are particular codes, harmonized tariff codes that are associated with them based upon their category and what kind of product it is. There's a tax that's associated with that code that's then multiplied times the value of the goods in the shipment. And then that's the tax and duty bill. And whether a business decides to push that off to their customers or absorb it is up to what kind of company they are and what their needs are and their goals are.
So I've always noticed, like anytime I see something that I wear, something that always says made in China. Why is it that products are normally made in China versus being made inside the US?
The reality of it is that it started with greed. It started many years ago where businesses decided to offload or offshore their businesses because their business productions, because there was a cost structure that was more feasible or made more sense overseas. And there was a labor force that was much cheaper than, let's say, in the United States. So through the last 50 years, we've shifted away from being a manufacturing nation. We're just a nation now, and goods made all over the world. And China is not just the United States' factory, they're the world's factory. As a matter of fact, only about 15 to 20% of their global exports go to the United States. 80% of their exports go to the rest of the world. So they're the manufacturers of the entire planet, let's call it. The reasons today why we can't really bring so much of these productions over, which they are trying to do. There's ally shoring, which is an idea to try, and near shoring, which is an idea of making closer better. Can we bring things to Mexico? Can we bring things to Canada? Can we bring things to the United States and try and do things? It's only within a certain tolerance, though, and it may not make sense for all product categories because if you have the choice between going and buying a t-shirt for 15 bucks or buying a t-shirt for $100, it's the same shirt. You probably are going to buy the one that's $15 that was made in China than the shirt that was $100 that was made down the street, most probably, or on a consistent fashion you would, because if you didn't, then you probably don't have the economics to continue to facilitate buying $100 shirts. And the price structures would be unequal. So when we look at the question of why not the United States or why not anywhere else on the planet than, let's say, China or current places, we have to look at five things, okay? Materials, like does that market, does that economy have the materials that are needed to produce the goods you want to produce? The level of output, do they have the manufacturers or suppliers to actually be able to produce at a level that the local market or domestic economy needs, right? If you have a factory down the street, but they can only make 10 t-shirts every day, but what the society needs is 10,000 t-shirts a day, you have a problem there with your output. The resources. Do you have people who want to actually be factory workers? Do you have people that are skilled enough or trained enough to do those things? And if you don't, then that's an issue. Or you have to bring people in or pay them 10 times as much to get the right kinds of people. So that increases the cost of products. Do you have the technology? Technology, not just currently, but also for the future. And in the end, when you look across these different factors, all of these things impact the cost. And you ask the question on why not the United States, why China, and so on. For some products that are commoditized, that just basically come out of a machine and doesn't have a level of labor or resource, whatever, and you can get those materials at a reasonable level, you could have an apples to apples comparison. And there are some industries where that makes sense, like corrugated and paper products and other things. A lot of that is made in the United States. There are many other products like technology products and so on and so forth where it's just overly complex. You need access to the materials. The labor cost is way too high, and there are other challenges. Industry by industry, product by product really give you the idea of the determination on why overseas versus domestic. And hopefully I answered a little bit of that for you.
Like you definitely did. So you kind of talk about inflation. I'm just now getting into adulthood, and I've noticed that inflation has been like one of like the biggest talks throughout at least my life, like throughout the past couple of years. How could inflation slow down, or what are some ways that makes like it's almost impossible for inflation to stop at this point?
I'm not going to say it's impossible to stop because unfortunately the United States and other countries in the world print more money or they just decide to curb different cut rates or do different things in order to curb when you have really significant levels of inflation that are happening at the time. But what I will tell you is that as long as we don't take advantage of the global economy and we have a very insular way of thinking, right? We will never be able to have the most efficient outcomes, which will then reduce levels of inflation. And I'm talking about back again, regardless of your political affiliations, Trump, not Trump, whatever, doesn't make a difference. We're talking just purely economics here. If the cost of goods are higher, right, that's causing inflation. And then from that, basically, you will then be able to cause recession. And I'm talking about the cost of all kinds of goods. I'm not even talking about just like products that you would think of generally. Let me give you an example. The building industry, right? Building homes. If shingles are coming from overseas, and if wood products are coming from overseas, or glass that we use for our windows that are in these homes, and there are significant duties and tariffs being placed upon them, or the cost of transit is too high, or we're having a war on a part of the planet, and so gas and oil is increased. Then in the end, those building materials, the cost of those things are increased, and therefore the cost of our homes increases. And so we see inflation with regards to products that then can impact industries as well. So that happens when, again, global affairs and potentially trade wars or issues between nations cause disruptions that can in turn create inflation type of situations.
So when it comes to global exchange, could you see anything with crypto being in the future?
Cryptocurrency.
Yes.
The reality of it is that cryptocurrency is nothing that new or interesting. It's been around for a good probably 7 or 8 years now, and it's just an alternate way of transacting in commerce. I don't necessarily see it as an area that, or at least not for a while, that's going to impact the duties and tariffs between nations because in the end, the United States government is not going to take cryptocurrency to pay for duties that come through their ports. It's just an unregulated currency. It devalues in many ways the US dollar in some ways. Not devalues, but it basically operates in a bit of like a black box in some ways. And the reality of it is that the United States is trying to raise taxes and duties and tariffs for a reason. So they want to basically have these costs be not necessarily hurting the US consumer, but they want those costs to be a deterrent so that they get, again, nations to do what they want them to do. Do I think that more and more people are going to use cryptocurrency? And I think people do already. I think that they use it in different mechanisms. I've even seen in the last many years people having Bitcoin in their retirement accounts. They have Bitcoin IRAs and things of that nature. People are doing that, but essentially the adoption hasn't been fully there, and without the government support, it will never really be able to push down through the people in the most effective manner that touches every one of our lives every single day. It's great and it's a nice alternative. And I've worked within cryptos and been involved in blockchain related initiatives and ventures. So I understand the power of it and the capabilities of it, but it all comes down to the adoption. And not only that, but the promotion of those ideas among the citizens. And if that's not in place, then it's always just something that's fringe, or it's something that's just in the ether, but not necessarily something that's fully adopted.
So when you first started your company till now, what's like the biggest lesson that you've learned so far?
Always trust yourself. Always trust yourself is very important. And that in order to lead others, you have to lead yourself first. You have to basically be able to be the leader within and lead by example. And then as you put out ideas or concepts or try to lead others, they will have adoption of the things that you are trying to promote, as long as they understand and believe that you have their best interests in mind and also the best interests of your organization in mind. So I would definitely think it's about self-awareness. It's about trust. It's not about the things that historically were thought of regarding leadership, such as like domination or trying to conquer others. I don't believe in that today or for many years now. I think it's more about being empathetic, and it's about assimilation and really being able to have people come together for a collaborative cause.
When you first started till now, like you said, you talked about how you understood leadership differently, as in today is more of a showing empathy rather than showing like your dominance. How has that mindset been able to allow you to develop and grow your business?
I think it has, because more people want to follow a shared message as opposed to a message that is shoved down their throats. And that's an important distinction. If you want to basically build a tribe, or you want to build people around you that care about what you're doing and really want to put their heart and soul into it and give you the extra mile, you have to walk in their shoes. You have to be able to understand their needs. And that in business is one of the most important things. Know your audience. If you're talking to audience A and all you're talking about are the things that audience B cares about, then you'll never be able to get a sense of connection. You'll never be able to get a sense of identification. And because of that, they won't follow you and they won't go the extra mile and do the work that you need to do. The other thing, too, is about tolerance. We have to understand that, again, we're global citizens, and we have to know that nothing comes from pessimism except for a lack of achievement. And we need to always be working towards common goals and common objectives and break down the barriers between people and between nations. And that's something that we need to continue to strive to do. And our governments and economies need to keep pushing for it. We understand that in global supply chain because every single day we're operating with people on the other side of the planet. My offices in China are getting ready to celebrate Chinese New Year. For the next week and a half, they're basically on vacation, just like in the way that we were during our holiday season here in the United States. Am I upset about that? Is the rest of the world upset about that because it disrupts things and so on and so forth? Maybe a little bit, but again, it's about mutual respect. Do we expect that the rest of the world should be upset that we're on our holiday breaks when the rest of the world needs to go on their holiday breaks too? And again, these are just little examples of how we need to be tolerant to the needs and goals of everyone when you're operating in a global economy.
All right, so let's go a little bit more into that. What is it like working with multiple nations all over around the globe?
What is it like? Again, you have to absolutely be ready to be flexible. You have to be ready to be compromising. You have to understand that you're consistently learning. You're a student of the process. And yes, there are times where you need to mandate that certain goals or certain performances are happening in the way you need them to. And how you do that is through communication. You need to present a very clear cut idea of what your goals and your needs are from the outset, from the very beginning. make sure everybody understands it, everybody's willing to follow a process, they're going to sign an agreement to follow these things, and realize that things are going to change. There could be challenges and obstacles that are going to come up along the way. But as long as you have a good relationship and you have good communication, you'll be able to resolve those things. It's when you don't have that communication and you don't have that relationship, and on top of it, don't have the visibility or resources or capabilities, that's when you have real challenges.
So in my book, Realistic CEO Tony, he talks about the LBW, the long, lonely, boring work. So can you tell us a little bit about the long, lonely, boring work that goes into your position?
Yes, I would not necessarily call it boring work because it's definitely long and
Hmm.
it's definitely work. But that B part, that doesn't really apply so much to me and my business. And the reason why that is because no 2 days are the same. We are continuously operating in an industry of fluctuations. Every single day, there are things that are in our control and things that are not in our control that we have to deal with that impact the supply chain and our customers. So, with that, we're consistently being creative problem solvers. And when you're being a creative problem solver every day, it's tough to get bored. It's very tough to get bored because you're consistently challenged and things are always shifting. So on. Now, what does get a little bit boring is the fact that it's always in flux. The fact that you would love or wish that, hey, I just wish that everything would just go smoothly tomorrow. And when that doesn't happen, you say, oh, there's another day that things aren't going smoothly. So it's actually funny because the boring part is the fact that it's consistently changing. It's not
Hmm.
the fact that it's always constant. So when your constant is flux, which is what it is for us, always moving, always changing, that can get tiring.
So during COVID, and you talked about already that people started to understand about and learn about the supply chain during COVID, but how has the supply chain been affected since COVID?
I think it just really comes down to people's understanding that it's important, to people hearing these words and just having a basic level of familiarity around this. Do they have deep knowledge? Maybe not so much. For the last 2 years, if you look at my social media platforms, any of my Instagram or LinkedIn or YouTube or any of these places, I put up videos every single day, 30 seconds to 60 seconds around different supply chain topics, because it's my goal to basically try to educate consumers, students, business people, even supply chain experts around various topics of the supply chain that still are being misunderstood, that still are not fully comprehended. Whether that's in current events, we hear about this all the time. Do you really know what that means? Do you know why it impacts your pocket? It's important for you to know these things. There's no real like relatable voice for this extremely important industry that touches every single one of us every day. So I try to do that as much as I can. Generally speaking, I think there's more of an appetite to know more about what the supply chain is since the pandemic. But do we fully have a comprehension? Does everyday people know why it's important, how it operates, why these challenges may impact their cost of goods? Not so much. And I'm on a mission to try to help with that now that there is an appetite for knowledge post the pandemic.
If you were to go back when you first started your business and give yourself some advice, what would it be?
I think it would be the advice that I would give to almost any entrepreneur, which is you're going to try a lot of things. You're going to basically take this shotgun approach rather than a single bullet approach, right? Where you're going to have all these pellets that are going to go, and some are going to hit the mark and some aren't going to hit the mark, and so on. And that's fine. That's okay. In order for you to truly be able to figure out what direction and pathway you want to take, you are going to have the ups and downs. It's those trials and those tribulations that are going to end up being the backbone of your success. That's what it's going to be. So don't get discouraged, but realize that in those failures is success. And we always talk about like professional athletes like Michael Jordan or whatever, and you know how he always would say, no one's talking about all the shots that I missed in order to be able to make that shot when it came to that game time situation. Those hours and hours in the gym and all the headaches and the challenges that I dealt with, the training, the injuries to be able to be, let's say, the best at my game in the world. And that's how it is in the world of entrepreneurship and business. You're going to You're going to fall down. You're going to get up. You're going to go left. You should have gone right. And then you figure out that left is not the way to go, is the way to go. And you're going to go through this roller coaster ride, and all of it is important. All of it leads you to your ultimate idea of hitting the target the way you want to. I could never go back in any point in my life, in my business career, or even childhood, and say, I'm going to do things in the world of supply chain. No, it was a bunch of different experiences and different things that I had to do and try that all then came together to then be able to create this opportunity that I've been doing for a long time now. And looking back, every single one of those ups and downs and pitfalls was instrumental and critical to the success that I have today.
So you just said that you didn't really know if you were to go back in your childhood or even your earlier career, and you said you wouldn't have said that you're going to be in supply chains. How did you end up finding supply chains and realizing that this is actually one of your passions that you can turn into money as well?
I think it's like what we talked about before. It was really sort of situation. It was timing. It was previous experiences that I had, and pretty much who I am as a person, that in the end, a light bulb went off. And that's what happens with a lot of entrepreneurs. Again, you try 4 or 5 different things, and it was because you did that one thing that you failed at, and those other 2 things that were lukewarm, okay, and that one thing that you were somewhat successful from. In your mind, all of those things still exist. And somehow you connect the dots and say, hey, you know what? That failed experience and those 2 experiences that were somewhat, however they were, and that one that was somewhat successful. Now I understand that I can't do this, but I can do that, and I can't do this, that, and the permutations come together. And you say, now I realize what I should do or I'm supposed to do. So it's just experience. There is nothing like experience in this life to basically spotlight for you how you're going to be a successful entrepreneur.
I just got one last question for you, and it's what's one fun fact about yourself that nobody really knows?
Some people know, but not a lot of people know. I'm a very big musician. I basically started at a very young age playing music. I played in a bunch of rock bands. When I had hair once upon a time, and I was really very interested in going into the entertainment industry early on in my career. I still do a lot of music. I enjoy doing that, playing all different kinds of instruments and producing music, but I don't really talk about it too much because it just doesn't come across in my business world or my conversations. But that's an area of me that is important that I don't talk about enough.
What instruments do you play?
Oh, too many. Saxophone, guitar, drums, keyboards, all different kinds of things.
How, how did you get into playing instruments? Did you just happen to pick one up, or did you see it on television, or was it like how?
No, it started young. My dad was a classic guitarist. And so from around 6 years old, I started playing classical guitar. Then in school, we played in the bands and the jazz bands and all that stuff. So it was saxophone, it was alto, and then it was tenor, and then, moved through some jazz related instrumentation. And then as I started playing more live music and bands, then I started picking up other things like keyboards and drums and other things bass guitars, things that you would have in different musics and bands. But yeah, I love it. I think it's one of the most important art forms that we have. It's a great communication medium. It brings people together. It represents messages that people need to hear, but not in a way that you normally would hear it, like people to people, but through music. I'm a big music guy.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you again for coming on. I really do appreciate that. And for everybody that has been supporting me throughout my journey of becoming a CEO, I want to thank you as well. Ways that you can support even more is by going onto my website, realisticceo.com, and ordering a book, my book, Realistic CEO. And what you do with that, not only is it an inspiring book for you, your child, or even your grandchild, but for every book that you order, we donate to a kid in a lower to moderate income communities. And I want to say thank you so much for all the support that you've shown. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Realistic CEO podcast. See you in the next one. Peace.